Robert Wolfe. He heard the stories coming out of the mouth of his father. His father was a little boy who survived the brutal attempt to wipe the Jewish culture from the face of the earth. And he's written a book. Take a look at the cover. He's written those stories down and done extensive research on his own. And he is the author of Not a Real Enemy, the true story of a Hungarian Jewish man's fight for freedom, Holocaust survivor, true stories, World War II. And it's such a pleasure to have him on Midday today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm not sure if you've heard, but Georgia lawmakers are getting a lot of support for a law that would give stiffer penalties for anyone committing hate crimes against Jews, because we had seen an increase in that crime. So I wanted you to know that.
I love that. I think the perpetrators should be made to read books like mine and others like it. I think that's fantastic. That's the best news I've heard in a week.
Well, I did some reading, and I read that a lot of Holocaust survivors did not talk about their experiences. I have a picture of your father when he was a little boy. How old were you and your father when he began to share his stories of what happened to him?
Well, when I was just a kid, I mean, I was so busy in high school, college, medical school, that they didn't really spend a lot of time talking about it, although it did trickle into the conversations from time to time. My mom, also a survivor, and most of her family actually survived. She talked about the history more early on in my life. I did read my dad's story. The histories actually went from, my motivation was it went from paper and pencil to typewriter to a computer. My dad and mom collaborating my dad's autobiography in the 1970s. And then I did read the manuscript as a typewritten document. I didn't think much of it at the time, except for maybe one of his major escape, which stuck in my mind for many years.
I'm going to stop you right there, because I read a little bit, but I didn't find the details. There was intrigue, there was espionage, there was forgeries. How did your father escape?
So, all right, so now my dad, when he was in the early 20s, when the Nazis finally affected the Hungarian Jews in 1943, 1944, my dad was conscripted into a forced labor camp in Hungary. And they were beaten and treated brutally and abused. And anti-Semitism is in the background of the whole book, including then. And meanwhile, my dad's parents were corralled and deported to Auschwitz, and he had no idea for months. There was no TV, no radio, no telegrams. And my dad eventually escaped. They were marching from place to place to place. They were starving much of the time. They had ridiculous work to do, but finally my dad had enough, and they were marching, and he thought he was on a death march in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and he and his friend just decided to take off right at dusk. That was his first out of several escapes. Later on, they got away. They ended up in Budapest. They got corralled by a double crosser, as they would say.
Yes.
And then they escaped again. So right in front of Nazi headquarters in Budapest. So that was his first two escapes. So this is the Nazi part. The cloak and dagger stories and the forged papers was there were Wallenberg's papers that my dad and his best friend Frank had that helped them from time to time to move from point A to point B.
We don't hear many of the stories. I have a little video of, it's disturbing still to see, no matter how many times you see it, of the Jews being forced to march and headed to who knows where. And there are some pictures of your father and his wife and your grandparents coming up too. What do you want people to go away with after reading your book?
Well, number one, how wrong anti-Semitism is, how destructive it is, not only anti-Semitism, but racism and prejudice in general. I think it's destructive, it's unnecessary. It just takes a little bit more of education. And I want people to realize that as they read the book, as many have, that what happened to my father could happen to any one of us in just a heartbeat. It could be a bad neighbor, a bad local government, a bad federal government, or a bad foreign government that could change your life overnight. So also I want people to appreciate how good it is to live in the free world, and how bad the dark world really is. That the people in my dad's story, the friends you thought were your friends turned out to be his enemies sometimes, and vice versa. There's a lot of messages within the book. Also perseverance and resilience and how to survive the most harrowing times.
And looking towards the future. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.